Good morning. Welcome to the Point. With all of the other news we've been covering, we haven't paid much attention to the primary coming up, but this morning we'll focus on the 6th Congressional District where 2 Republicans are vying for the nomination, including incumbent Fred Upton. I asked him how the pandemic and other issues have changed campaigning.
Well, it's changed a lot because we're not doing any of that. When you go to a store, you wear a mask. I have to say that I'm still surprised that people actually recognize me. Because I've got maybe a hat on and I'll always have a mask on the inside. But, there's no door-to-door, there's no parades, there's no festivals, there's no county fairs. I mean, it is really quite a bit different than it ever has been before. And the other thing is, as it relates to my staff, our physical offices were closed for a number of months, number one. And number two, it's so that they're all operating out of their homes as well. We were able to change the phone numbers and figure out how to get the mail and do all of that thing. But in terms of personal appointments, until just the other day, couldn't do any of that. So it really is a whole different way of life.
When you think about this going forward, and I know we've talked about a lot of the initiatives that you have been working on, but as you campaign for re-election, what are some of your focuses? What are some of the things that you would like to hone in on as you go through this campaign? And if you're successful in the fall, what you would like to take back to Washington?
Well, a couple of things. Always our priority has been family first. Second was the job performance. Make sure you're there to vote. Make sure that you're active on the committee, Energy and Commerce, arguably one of the most powerful in the Congress to get things done. And if you do those two things right, the campaign, I don't want to ever say it's easy, but that's the priority that it should be. So, as we think about this fall, it'll be the record that we've been able to accomplish. It's working with both sides of the aisle. We have divided government. That's still going to stay. Whether it's close or whether it's you got a different body that's Republican or Democrat. And as we have found, people don't really care if you have an R or a D next to your name. They just want the job done, and that's us. So your hardcore folks on either side, they may not be too happy, but at the end of the day, that's who I am, and that's who the voters have elected the last good number of elections.
You talk about not caring about having the R or the D, and I'm always interested in the collaboration that you've had with Representative Gett, working on the 21st century cures and working on that going forward. How do you do that when what we see outwardly and what dominates news very often are those people who are less likely to cooperate? I mean, we see a lot of that division. How do you come to a consensus when there are members in both parties that don't seem particularly interested in that?
Well, I got my lesson from Ronald Reagan. I worked for him at the White House for 4.5 years. And Republican president, a Democratic Congress, and when he ran for re-election, he won 49 states. And he did it because he got things done. He had good friendships on both sides of the aisle, and there was no harpoons that are going at each other, no spears. And that has always been my attitude. I have to say that when I was elected, I never thought the Republicans would be in the majority because for my lifetime they had not been. And so I set out from day one to say, hey, if I want to get something done, you got to work with the other side. And I'm going to do that on you name the issue, virtually every single one. So when I became chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I actually changed the rules of the committee. They're still in place today to foster more bipartisanship. As a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, one of the larger caucuses in the Congress, 50 members, equally divided, 4 here for Michigan, between Republicans and Democrats. We actually were successful in changing the rules of the House because we made it incumbent upon a vote for the Speaker. And so that was done. And if you look back at the last year and a half, good number of successes. We're working on, you name the issue, COVID, immigration, keeping the government open, trying to be responsible. The PPP program and the Paycheck Protection Plan was something that actually emerged from our caucus and is now the law that the president strongly supported. So, as I look back at that, that's who I've always been. You've got to establish those relationships again on both sides, unless you want to to just look at just windmills spinning around you, and your wheels never get anything done. You never get to a destination. That's not who I am.
When you think about where we are, I mean, this is a big election cycle to be sure, because A, as we pointed out at the top of this interview, it's a very different way of campaigning. But B, there is so much going on in our country, from the Black Lives Matter movement to through and continue to deal with the COVID pandemic. What are the real priorities? I know, again, you're working on an expansion of the 21st Century Cures, but what are some of the things that Congress has to deal with immediately when the new constitution of that comes back in January?
Well, we have a full plate. The economy is always number one. How do we get things started again? And with COVID, that doesn't happen until we have therapeutics, the treatment, you have the testing, and ultimately you get a vaccine. And that was one of the things that I asked earlier this week when we had Dr. Tony Fauci testified before our hearing on a virtual hearing. That was the question that I asked in the national news then, that he gave out, and that we're likely to have a vaccine before the end of the year. That's very important. So that economy is number one. And it's going to take some time to get things back. You talk to our small businesses, and of course, they're the lifeline of our economy. It was so important that we actually passed the PPP program to get things done. So that was critical, number one. But in addition to those national issues, you also have the local ones that are mighty important. I mean, I look at the Great Lakes and the work that we're doing to make sure that we can continue the efforts to not only stop the Asian carp, but also to make sure that the water is clean. I look at the auto industry, so important here to Michigan, because the auto suppliers, the auto jobs, 1 in 7 jobs are dependent upon the auto industry. As a member of the Auto Caucus, again, we have to work together to get things done. And, it's those relationships, those issues that are on the front burner that you've got to always have some work on, some expertise, and obviously a dedicated staff that's just as serious to get this stuff done as I am.
I want to talk a little bit about spending. I mean, your career in the House and even before has been centered around the budget and spending, and we know that this pandemic has certainly been an area where there has been a lot of outflow from the national treasury, and there are people that are concerned about the amount of debt that the country holds. Is there anything that Congress can do while trying to meet all of the needs that you laid out just moments ago, and try to control or get more manageable the amount of money that we spend in this country?
Well, there is a couple things. I've been on, one of the things that we've done is Zoom calls left and right with you name the individual, whether they be in the past, the Obama or Clinton administration, or the Bush and obviously the Trump administration now. We've asked the question about the national debt, the deficit, how do we get back on track? As a longtime fiscal conservative, obviously that's been a key issue for me, going back to the days when I worked for President Ronald Reagan. But here's the answer. We need to fix this pandemic to the best of the ability that we can now. And as we have listened to Republican and Democratic former secretaries of the Treasury, chairman of the Fed, a lot of different meetings, they have all come to us and said, you know what? We're so much stronger in the spring and early summer economically than perhaps we will be in the fall. And you all need us. You all need to do everything that you can to manage this in the best way that you can. In other words, what is it that your small businesses need? What is it that your consumers need? How do we get this economy moving again? Because you'll never climb out of this debt if we don't get to the economic growth that we had before. To get those people back to work, to get that economy really running again. And so do it now. Do as much as you can now so that maybe we won't hit that second wave. Maybe we won't have a second shutdown later on. And because we're frankly probably the only nation on the planet that has the resources to try and get through this thing. So we've got to do that. And that's why it's so important that we devote the resources that we can to finding a vaccine, to make sure that people are tested and safe as we lead our hopefully normal lives in the months ahead that it'll take to get us there.
Congressman Upton has a Republican challenger, and you'll meet her next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Republican Elena Oelke is a realtor who is challenging incumbent Fred Upton in the 6th Congressional District primary to be held in August. We talked to her about her background and why she's running. Well, let's start with your background, what you've done, where you've been up until this point, and then we'll get on into the political part of this.
Rick, where do I begin? I think I should write a book. I came from the area of Ukraine to United States in 1998. I grew up in Soviet Union, believe it or not. That was the country at the time when I was born. Then when it was disbanded, the area where I lived prior to moving to the United States in 1998 was Ukraine. When I came to the United States, it was very beautiful area here by the Lake Michigan, but obviously I used to work at the large international corporations, travel around the world, and the community where I ended up in Michigan was more quaint, beautiful, beach-like, resort-like, and I actually needed to fresh start my career in a new country. So I decided to take some real estate classes. I love architecture. I love working with people. I love business side of it. So I'm a real estate broker now, and I've been in the business for over 20 years. I'm very happy to be doing that, assisting buyers, home buyers and home sellers. I work with architects, builders, you name it. So I am a businesswoman, not a politician, very business-like background. I also have done a lot of education in my life, and I have master's degree, graduated magna cum laude from university in the area of Ukraine, of course, prior to coming to the United States. I took some business classes, real estate classes in America. So I'm pretty savvy on many subjects, and my educational background is quite extensive. Pardon.
That's a fascinating background. So that leads me to the obvious question. How did you decide to take all of that and decide to run for the U.S. House of Representatives?
Well, Rick, I am American citizen. Sky is the limit, right? I live American dream, and I would like to preserve this opportunity for future generations of Americans. As a business person, I have hope that politicians do their job and then they help to keep our country on course. However, in the recent years, the more I started looking into it, the more I decided that we need to take our country back. And some of the decisions that coming up from Washington have been very disappointing. I believe in freedom, liberty, and justice for all. I believe in our Constitution. And that encouraged me and inspired me to step up and say, you know what, Democratic Party has been hijacked by Marxists and socialists. I lived socialism. I know why it's dangerous for America, and I will be the perfect person to explain and to stand up in Congress to anyone who advocates for sale of socialism to the free people of America. That's my main driver and inspiration behind my run. With that said, there are many other issues that I believe our country is facing, and I believe I'm up to the challenge to see this through and make sure America's future is prosperity, and everybody in our country has the same opportunity to succeed as I did when I came to America and became a proud American citizen.
When you say you want to take our country back, what does that mean? What specifics are you thinking about when you talk about launching your platform? What are some of those other issues that you want to focus on if you're successful?
I believe, based on some of the voting records that I've seen coming out from Congress, I have seen some very disappointing decisions. I do understand that President Trump is trying to bring America back to the constitutional basis. Unfortunately, our Congress and our politicians over the years seem to have been drifting more towards populist agendas. And I believe that our Constitution, our rights, our freedoms, the jobs, the veterans, the seniors have been neglected for a long time. The small businesses, look what happened during COVID-19. The small businesses pretty much were shut down and the large corporate stores were allowed to operate. We're going as far as it's unimaginable from United States Constitution and taking our country back, meaning we need to bring our country back on course, back to what the founding fathers had in mind: liberty, justice for all, and of course, freedom, individual rights. We cannot let our country drift from that. And that's what I mean by taking the country back. And I almost believe that this may be our last chance to take our country back because of what I see takes place and how far we have drifted away from original design of founding fathers, unfortunately.
One of the things that I talk to all potential members of Congress about is about spending, because Congress holds the purse strings. And we have heard from virtually every presidential candidate that has been successful over the past 40 years that they would do something about the deficit and get spending down. We hear the same from people who are running for Congress, but it continues to be larger and larger. What is your take as a business person who has to balance a budget on a yearly, if not a daily basis, about the spending habits in Washington, and how would you approach that?
Absolutely, Rick. It's an excellent question. As a business person, I am fiscal conservative. That means we cannot spend the money we do not have. I believe in smaller government, less regulation. We cannot suffocate our business people and our small businesses, and we cannot spend the money we don't have. It's very irresponsible. And when I am in Congress, I will be definitely one of the people who stands up for a system of checks and balances, fiscal responsibility, less wasteful spending, in fact, no wasteful spending, and smaller government. We do need to take responsibility. I do believe part of the problem is that, like you said, many candidates who keep running, but look at that, we have 98% incumbent re-election rate. So of course, nothing much changes. We get promises, but things stay the same, spending gets out of hand. That's why I am running, because I believe that there is a time for change, and I believe that we could get it accomplished with the two magic words: term limits. I believe in term limits, and I believe that if we do have new people like myself coming in with taking America back its course, back to Constitution, back to responsible spending, back to taking care of our people first and America first, like President Trump does, which I am running to support him. And I will be definitely a fiscal conservative and voice for people, where we need to take taxpayers' money seriously and be responsible with it, not spend it and waste it and then come back and ask taxpayers for more. That is irresponsible, and it needs to end. We need balanced budget.
You've talked about some of the larger issues that you would be facing in Washington. Are there any things that are more general for the district in Southwest Michigan that you hope to represent? Are there local issues that you could take to Washington beyond what we've discussed?
There are a lot of issues, Rick. Last year, we have a very devastating effect of the high rise in water levels on Lake Michigan. A lot of our townships and counties have lost, and private property owners. I'm also very passionate about private property rights, being a real estate broker, of course, and growing up in the Soviet Union when there were no private property rights at all. So I look at our area as the beautiful treasure of Great Lakes. There's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and we can see how we can help our communities, our business owners, to deal with the aftermath of one of the highest water levels that we had in the last year that has devastated our resort communities, our mariners, our private property owners. That's one of the issues. Then there is also an issue of generational poverty. I drive through the city of Benton Harbor, where I reside, every day for 20 years, and I still observe a lot of poverty, condemned buildings. Americans must live in dignity. I would like to get to the bottom of the problems. I would like to make sure people in our district are not struggling and not surviving, but thriving and live up to their best potential. I want to be the voice of people who have been forgotten and people who have been underprivileged or underserved, but as well to the people who are great contributors to the community. And we need to work together to make sure our district thrives and achieves, and our people live in dignity and to up to their best potential, that they're not struggling. That breaks my heart when I travel around the United States and I see the level of well-being in our district. I believe we can do better, and I will be happy to research, to talk to the stakeholders, to talk to the community leaders, to talk to everyday district constituents and hear their voices and see what do they need, what are their needs, how can we get about getting it done. Like I said, I'm not a career politician, I am a businesswoman. Means I identify the problem, I see who could be the team players that we could tackle this problem with, and I want to get it done. No excuses. This is how I approach our District 06, and I'll be happy to do everything and anything in my power when I am in Congress to bring everyone together so our district just prospers as well as our country.
The August primary is rapidly approaching, and if you haven't looked at your ballot to see what races you'll be asked to decide, here's a good opportunity. Just go to woodtv.com and click on the link that will show you your ballot. And I'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. Next week, we'll take a look at the Democratic primary, where Representative John Hoadley and teacher Jen Richardson will square off. We'll continue to watch the races as you join us every Sunday morning. To the Point.